What's up, gamers? It's your boy, JKon. Welcome to another episode of Rostermania. Since I've been a bit busy this past month and many rosters have started to fill out, I decided that I would cover each region in its own separate video. Today's video will be covering moves that have been confirmed in the Pacific region, and the next two videos will cover Americas and EMEA, so stay on the lookout for those. Now, without further delay, let's get into it. You saw the thumbnail, you read the title, and yes, it is true. El Diablo has been raised from hell and has set his sights on a new region to conquer, Pacific. Yay! The best player of 2022 has officially joined Bleed Esports on a 2-year contract to once again compete at a tier 1 level. Ye will be joining the Singaporean organization to replace Juicy, who is their young superstar duelist main who had to step down due to him being too young to compete in VCT. He has decided to do his Singaporean military service in the meantime and will be joined by his former teammate Neff, who left Bleed to do the same. Not only has Bleed dropped the bag to secure the American players' talents, they have also brought in young Singaporean Sentinel main Egoist to fill the remaining vacancy. This is definitely a super team in my eyes, as I thought Bleed were incredibly impressive throughout 2023 in tier 2. They absolutely dominated throughout 2023, going 53-11 in maps across 26 series. That's an 83% map win rate with a 92% series win rate. They were the clear-cut best team in APAC's tier 2 scene, and I thought that they would be able to compete with some of the bottom tier teams in the franchise league easily. They have the absolute mythical beast of Scary on the roster who fulfilled his promise to return to tier 1 after chasing the bag and grind it back to the top. Bleed have been a huge name in the APAC scene for a while, so I'm glad to see another organization that really cares about Valorant get their time in the spotlight. For those who don't know who Bleed Esports are, they are the winners of Pacific Ascension and are the 11th team to join the franchise league. To give a bit of a backstory on the org and team, Bleed entered Valorant in late 2021, signing the core of Uwu's roster of MySG talent. The team didn't find much success, and after 2 months, 3 members were dropped. To take their place, Darion and Lenny were signed, and Juicy was loaned to them. The new roster saw immediate success as they went on to win Southeast Asia Esports Championship 2021, as well as Bleed's own event, Bleed Esports Christmas Showdown. At this time, Bleed would drop the bag and bring in 2 Swedish imports in Pith and Maxi, the former being of early G2 fame. They would also sign Flaring, a French-Singaporean controller player, as Juicy's loan ended, and Lakia, a legend of German Counter-Strike, as their head coach. Bleed would start out 2022 by participating in the VCT MySG Split 1 Challengers with their full Indonesian roster, making it through the open qualifiers and group stage without dropping a map. They would lose their opening playoff matchup to Fastel, a free agent group that funnily enough had Fane on the roster, the only member from Uwu to not get picked up by Bleed originally. Bleed would then go on a lower bracket run to make it to the grand finals, which they lost to Paper Rex 3-0. Bleed would be able to qualify for the Champions Tour Asia Pacific Stage 1 Challengers playoffs, where they would be able to escape groups. This would be the first time we would see the Swedes in action, as Bleed would take wins over Maiden Thailand and Full Sense in the playoffs before falling to the lower bracket at the hands of Paper Rex. They would then lose to Xerxia in the lower bracket finals, as Scary had a series of a lifetime as he carried his team to Masters Reykjavik. Bleed would then participate in VCT MySG Split 2 Challengers, where they would go 3-4 in the group stage, taking wins over Todak, Blitz Esports, and Avium Esports. They would take L's from Paper Rex, Lays, Galaxy Esports, and KP Moon IIBLM9, but they would still be able to qualify for playoffs. Bleed would once again face off against Galaxy Esports and would take another 2-1 loss as they fell to the lower bracket. Bleed would then take back-to-back wins over Bear Claw Gaming and No Namers, but their run would end in 3rd place as they fell to Paper Rex 2-0. They would qualify for Stage 2 APAC Challengers play-ins, where they would win their matches against Ghetto Artists and RRQ. They would continue their win streak throughout the group stage, taking victories over Team Secret and Fancy United Esports, giving them a shot at playoffs to try to qualify for Masters Copenhagen. Unfortunately for them, their run did not go very far, as they would take their opening match against Griffin Esports 2-0, but would run into Paper Rex, who would once again take the dub and push the Singaporean org to the lower bracket. They would face a familiar foe in Xerxia, and the score would be just like last time, as they would go 1-2 and be put on the sidelines until LCQ. Bleed would make another roster change in the meantime, with Retla being promoted to the main roster. In the APAC LCQ, Bleed were able to 2-0 Alter Ego and Team Secret, but fell to Boom Esports in the upper finals 2-1. They would then face off against Onyx Esports, PRX Monyet, and RRQ Almimore's former team in the lower final, but would fall 2-1, and they would once again fail to reach an international event. Although Bleed did take many L's in these tournaments, they did primarily only lose to teams that were able to make it to the grand finals or win the entire thing itself, which shows that they were competitive enough but ran into many foes who were still a bit better than them. After LCQ, Bleed would release Retla, Darion, Lenny, and the 2 Swedes Maxi and Pith, as they would look for another rebuild, and that rebuild would see some familiar names return, as Darion JKon, Retla, and Juicy all reclaim starting roles, and they would bring in Crazy Guy and JH to complete the roster. They would participate in the Esports Club Challenger Series 9, where they would go 5-2 in a best-of-1 round robin and qualify to playoffs. They would 3-0 their matchup against Velocity Gaming and would take the trophy home with a 3-1 victory over Fancy United Esports. Bleed were not done with their signings, as they dropped an absolute bag on ex-Xerxes controller player Scary, as he chose to join the Singaporean organization and compete in Tier 2 over joining the Tier 1 franchise league. Scary is one of the best controllers in the world, and I am super happy to see him back in Tier 1 because he is an absolute monster and rightfully deserves a spot to compete against the best. The first time we would see Scary under the Bleed banner would be at the GXR India Invitational, where they would sweep their SEA close qualifier, taking wins over Louvre, Made in Thailand, and South Built Esports twice. In the main event, they would take best of 1 group stage wins over Paper Rex and Boom Esports, but would lose to God Squad, who were global esports Indian roster featuring SK Rossi and Lightning Fast. Bleed would qualify for the playoffs, but would fall 2-0 to the New Look Heretics, who solidified the roster for the 2023 season. Bleed would then participate in another third-party event called Sky Esports SEA Championship, where they would sweep their group and move on to an elimination bracket where they lost 2-1 to Made in Thailand, but were able to make a lower bracket run, taking down Naus 2-0 and South Built Esports 2-1. In the playoffs of the event, they would be able to 2-0 God Squad and got revenge on Myth, as they also 2-0'd them. Bleed would face off against Made in Thailand for a third time in the event for the trophy, which they would be able to claim with a 3-1 victory. Bleed would close out their year with 2 more third-party events and a few more roster changes, as JH was removed from the roster before one of the events, but was added once more before the last, as Retla would leave the roster. Bleed definitely have a habit of adding and subtracting the same players, plus Lexi minus Lexi plus Lexi minus Lexi, plus Darion minus Darion plus Darion, plus Juicy minus Juicy plus Juicy minus Juicy, plus Retla minus Retla plus Retla minus Retla, plus JH minus JH plus JH minus JH. Retla's last event under the Bleed banner was at Africa TV Valorant SEA Invitational, where the roster would see a group stage exit, falling 1-2 in best of ones, taking a dominant ascent versus Dual United Esports, but losing 13-11 to both Xerxes Esports and Fancy United Esports. JH would return for the final event of the year, Penta Pro Series, and his team would be able to sweep their round robin matches, taking wins over Boom Esports, Velocity Gaming, and Revenant Esports. They would face off against Boom once again in the grand finals, and were able to end their year lifting a trophy as they took the match 3-2. 2023 would see Bleed compete in the VCL Malaysia-Singapore Split 1, where they would go 6-1 in their group stage series, only dropping 3 maps across the board. They would qualify for playoffs and run through their competition, taking down X10 Esports and Enigma Gaming 2-1, and sweeping X10 3-0 in the grand finals to win the split. In Split 2, Bleed would bring in another young gun in Neff, and they would have an even more dominant performance, as they would go 7-0 in their group stage series with a 14-0 perfect map record. That map win streak would be slightly marred as they dropped 1 map to X10 in their opening playoff matchup, but would proceed to defeat the Singaporean roster 2-1. They would then go on to sweep Kizuna Esports 2-0 and face off against X10 one more time in the grand finals, where they would sweep them aside 3-0 and qualify for VCT Pacific Ascension. Fun fact, Bleed's new member Egoist was on this X10 roster throughout all of 2023. Bleed looked absolutely dominant heading into Ascension, going 10-0 in series and 21-1 in maps. In Ascension, Bleed would be able to top their group with 2-1 victories over Orangutan and Scars, while 2-0ing Bonkers. They would fall 2-0 to D+, but would be able to take the first seed out of Group Omega and be seeded directly into the semi-final. Bleed would face off against Boom Esports, and in a highly contested 3-map series that spanned 46 rounds, Bleed would come out on top and would face off against Scars in the grand finals. Bleed would go on to 3-0 the Japanese org in dominant fashion, only dropping 19 rounds in the entire affair, and infamously introducing Jemkin's Reina to my boy Owen, as he went 0-14 on Bind. And that leads us to where we are today, with Bleed joining the Pacific Franchise League as the 11th organization. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, Bleed has had to make a couple more roster changes, as both their young Singaporean players have stepped down to complete their military service. Egoist has a lot of hype coming into the Tier 1 league, as he put up absolute numbers in Tier 2 on X10 Esports playing the Sentinel role. He was a very sought after prospect, and I'm very excited to see him compete on the big stage. I think he'll be able to put up numbers immediately and will make a name for himself, as I expect this team to be fighting for a top spot in the league. Plus, he has such a sick IGN, gives me a lot of those Blue Log vibes, as Ego is everything in that anime, and Bleed Egoist goes pretty hard. Go check out my pros and cons on Blue Lock if you want my review and thoughts on the show. Now back to the main man himself, Jacob Ye Whitaker. a fan favorite and this team's import player. Ye didn't have the best 2023, going from the C9 super team to the depths of tier 2 on DSG. I honestly was really hyped for DSG because I have been an avid Toast fan for many years now, and I think it's great what he's been doing in the esports space. I really appreciate the hype and attention that he has brought, especially to areas where most people probably don't care as much about, like the game changer scene, the league challenger scene, and of course TFT, which he gained a lot of renown from. Shout out to Milk, who just won the DSG trials and has been signed to the roster. The original DSG project that was put together was pretty fun to watch, as I've always been a fan of Steel and I like Gangsta, but when the news dropped that Ye was joining the team, I was even more hyped. Unfortunately, they straight up did not have a good time, because after adding Ye to the team after the mid-season face-off and many roster changes along the way, DSG would go winless, losing 7 series straight and being relegated from challengers. The team struggled immensely as they were only able to take 2 map wins in that time span. Ye definitely did not perform to the standard that he set in the previous year, but it's also very difficult to go from one of the most well-oiled machines in Optic to a group of tier 2 players with a revolving door of members. Ye will definitely be looking to have a bounce back year coming into 2024, and I think he will have a chance to prove to everyone why they should fear his name. He's joining a team of absolutely cracked aimers that have brought together some of SEA's finest talent, so I hope they can build chemistry quickly, because if they come together, as a unit, I can see this team challenging for the trophy right off the bat. It'll be interesting to see what roles that this team will have each player in, as Juicy was the primary duelist and Neff played Sentinel and Flash Initiator for this team. Darian would also flex to Killjoy and Jet throughout 2023, both roles that Egoist and Ye play respectively. If I had to guess, the only roles I can confidently say would be Scary on Controller, Egoist on Sentinel, and Crazy Guy on Sova. Beyond that, the other 3 roles will get swapped around, so I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Fleet have been a big name in the scene for a long time, so I'm definitely hyped to finally see them in the spotlight. Say goodbye to Singapore and hello India, as Global Esports has signed 3 more members to complete their roster for 2024. They have signed Russ as their IGL, most well known for his time on Guild Esports in 2022, former Boom Esports staple Blaze King, and Finnish duelist Polvi, who is most well known for his time on 10-Star and Mad Lions with Russ and their new head coach Spin. Let's start with Russ and what his signing can mean for this roster. Russ unfortunately does not have the best reputation in the Valorant community because of his performance on the international stage with Guild in 2022. Guild's roster at the time had a lot of big names that we saw in the franchise league this past year in Safe, Leo, Trex, and Koldamenta. Guild initially entered the Valorant scene in late 2020, picking up Bonk, an all-Swedish roster that was led by Bonkar. They had the aforementioned Bonkar, Leo, Yasin, Draken, and Golf on the roster. They were a pretty good team at the time and participated in many tournaments, and in my opinion were always a dark horse to take them. They were definitely the EMEA team that I was rooting for in early Valorant, because I really liked Yasin and Leo, and I thought that Bonkar's name was hilarious, but soon saw his low-key genius for the game. The roster then brought on Safe for Goff and got quite close to making it to international events throughout 2021, but fell just short to Team Liquid in the grand finals of LCQ that year. The roster then went international for 2022 and put together the team that I mentioned earlier. This roster was able to qualify for challengers and went on to place 5th, 6th in qualification for Masters Reykjavik, but were able to overcome the hump in stage 2 as they qualified to Masters Copenhagen as EMEA's 3rd seed. Guild would be able to shock the world as they 2-0'd Optic in their opening matchup, with Leo putting up an insane 52, 30, and 14 with 245 ACS in his international debut. The maps were extremely close, going 24 rounds on Icebox and 30 on Split. Guild were able to hand Ye his absolute worst series performance since he joined the NV Optic core, going 25, 41, and 7 with 149 ACS. Russ definitely struggled in the series and continued to look like Guild's weak link, putting up the only negative scoreline for his team, but lucky for him, he wasn't the worst player in the server. Guild would go on to face Crew to see who would escape groups, and they would come out on top 2-1 in another highly contested series that would span 75 rounds. Trex, Leo, and Safe would hard carry their team over the line, and once again Russ would struggle, going 32, 54, and 30 with 145 ACS, and being the lowest rated player in the server. The interesting thing about Russ though was his absolute confidence and ability to come in clutch, and although he was struggling pretty hard throughout most of the series, he was the X factor in why Guild were able to get over the line. He really came alive in overtime, especially on Icebox, and single-handedly won them many rounds. He was able to take down 2 in the 26th round when Crew was on series point. He would repeat that act again in the 28th round, also Crew's series point, with Leo being able to bring a 2v4 into a 2v1 with Safe closing it out. Russ would get first blood in the 30th round and would get another on the retake as his team closed out the series with him securing 6 kills in overtime. A funny stat that I want to bring up in his scoreline is that although he went 18, 25, and 13, he had an incredible 8-1 in first kills to first deaths. That means he got 33% 60% of his frags in overtime and 44% of them as first bloods. If those aren't major impact frags, then I don't know what is. Russ definitely wasn't Guild's best player, but he definitely had his moments, even if he did struggle. Granted, he was playing Sage in the Sage go plant and die meta, so you can't fault him too much. Guild's playoff run would unfortunately be a very unlucky draw as they played against the two grand finalists in Paper Rex and Fun Plus Phoenix back-to-back. They would get 2-0'd by Paper Rex, getting clapped on Ascent 13-4, but would put up quite a fight on Fracture, losing in overtime 14-12. Unfortunately for Russ, this was his most infamous series as he put up an extremely pitiful 15, 38, and 5 with 107 ACS. A stat that showed his lack of performance is his cast at 53%. For those who don't know what cast is, it measures the round a player either gets a kill, assist, survived, or is traded. 53% is really bad, showing that a lot of his deaths were not impactful and just put his team at a disadvantage. Guild's lower bracket series against FPX went a little better, with them pushing Ascent to the final round and absolutely stifling FPX's attack on Breeze, going a perfect 12-0 in the first half and taking the map 13-3. Unfortunately, Angel and crew took that personally and smacked Guild back, taking Bind 13-4, eliminating their European brothers and kicking off their lower bracket run to win the tournament. Leo had one of his worst performances ever on Bind, going 3, 14, and 9 with 77 ACS, but overall, Russ was once again the worst rated player on his team, and this would be the last time he would compete with this roster. Russ didn't leave the best impression on the world in 2022, but I think he had to fill a pretty tough role during that meta. Also, again, he had moments of brilliance, but that was overshadowed by his poor play. He would go on to join a British free agent team called the Barbers that had ex-Liquid members in Link, Echoes Cryptics, and ex-Mech and Navi JD. They would compete in a third-party event and place 3rd, 4th before Russ and Link left to join another British free agent team, Le Petit Bouffon, where Russ would be the IGL and spend the rest of 2022 and 2023 leading. Le Petit Bouffon were able to qualify for the VCL Polaris League, where they would compete in both Stage 1 and 2. Le Petit Bouffon were able to top the regular season in Split 1, going 6-1 and qualifying to playoffs as the first seed. Unfortunately for them, their playoff run was very short as they lost 2-1 to Scheider and 2-0 to Focus. Russ would struggle in both of these series, being the lowest rated player on the server. Stage 2 didn't go as well as Stage 1 as Le Petit Bouffon went 5-2 in groups, but would lose 2-0 to Focus again in the playoffs, ending their year. And that leads us to where we are today, where Russ has been signed to Global Esports. I believe that he has improved a lot as a player since 2022, but he is still a weak fragger. I know he has picked up the IGL role and will be the main IGL for this global roster, but I don't have a ton of confidence in his ability to frag. Although he will have Ben Kai on the team to help secondary IGL, I'm not too confident overall. Russ didn't put up crazy numbers in tier 2, and although Polaris was dominated by Apex, I don't think their field of competition was that high, but I didn't really watch much of tier 2 EMEA. Russ played a lot of Flash Initiator throughout 2023, and I think they will keep him in this role, but I'll go over all of the roles that I think their members will be in after we finish talking about them. Speaking of the other members for this roster, Global Esports has signed Blaze King. Blaze King has spent his entire career on Boom Esports, being one of the founding members of the Indonesian roster who has seen quite a decent amount of success in tier 2. Boom's most recent endeavor was losing to Bleed in the semifinals of Pacific Ascension. Blaze King has definitely improved over time and put up solid numbers throughout 2023, primarily playing the controller role as well as flexing a Sova and Killjoy. I think he's a pretty solid addition to this roster and overall can be a pretty good anchor for the team, especially given his agent flexibility. Also, he has one of the best IGNs in my opinion. If you know, you know. And finally, the last member to join this roster is the Finnish duelist Polvi. Like I mentioned earlier, Polvi is most well known for his time on 10-Star and Mad Lions in 2022. Russ and Global Esports' new head coach Spin were on both of these rosters with him, so the connection to GE has been established. Polvi would spend most of his career in Tier 2 playing on teams such as 10-Star, The Barbers, Human Tripwires, Only Fins, and Valiant. In 2023, he was able to find a decent amount of success, winning multiple Tier 2 events as well as putting up numbers. I think he's quite an underrated duelist and has a lot of potential. He's joining a team that has a lot of variability in their players, so I think it'll be interesting to see how he fares in that environment. Hopefully the core of him, Russ, and Spin can bring stability to this roster. Now we have a final 5 for GE established: Benkai, Lightning Fast, Russ, Blaze King, and Polvi. I think the roles will most likely have Polvi continue to be on Duelist, with Lightning Fast being a secondary duelist or flex to a new role. Like I said earlier, Russ will most likely continue to be on Flash Initiator, with Blaze King being the main controller, who may potentially flex to Sova if needed. I also think that Benkai can fill the Info Initiator / Sova role if needed, but I think he will continue to be on Sentinels. 3 of these players have picked up Killjoy in the past, so they have quite a bit of flexibility in my opinion. I also think a lot of this team will come down to how well their game plan will be and how they can support their carries. The final 4 moves that I wanted to cover in today's episode are Gen.G adding Texture and Lakia to their roster, RRQ signing Jemkin, and Team Secret signing NDG. Let's start out with Texture. The former global esports member has found another spot in the franchise league. He is joining the rebuilding Gen.G that has removed everyone from their 2023 roster sans Meteor. Texture was originally a Jet main that played for DamWon Gaming all throughout 2021 and 2022. He was one of the founding members for that Korean roster and made a name for himself enough to join the GE Blue Lock experiment. He would eventually win out the ego battle and remained on the main duelist role for the team until April, where SK Rossi joined the main roster and he transitioned to playing Killjoy for the team. He was able to put up solid numbers throughout the year, being GE's second best player, but GE as a whole was struggling throughout most of the year. I think he's a fine addition to the rebuilding Korean roster, as he is able to play the Sentinel role at a pretty good level, and he can flex to play in a secondary duelist to Meteor if they need it. There isn't that large of a pool of top Korean talent, so I think grabbing one of the better ones is a great step to a rebuild. Another move that Gen.G made was in the coaching department, signing HSK, who was the head coach of the winless Detonation Focus Me this past year. To be honest, I'm not super high on this hire, but again, we don't really know what went on behind the scenes and how well he can really coach. Just because you go winless doesn't mean your career should be over, but I wasn't really inspired by DFM's game plans, and I think that's an area where a coach should have a lot of input. Gen.G have also signed Lakia to their 2024 roster, returning the fan favorite to the Tier 1 league. Lakia made his name back in 2021 playing for Newturn, a Korean roster that had CSGO legends Perry and Solo on it, as well as Allow and Suggest. The former most recently played for DFM this past year. They were able to dominate their region, being the second best team behind the legendary Vision Strikers, and were able to qualify for Masters Reykjavik. They were auto-qualified to the quarterfinals and faced off against Sharks Esports, where they would come out on top 2-1. They would go on to face Version 1, who was led by Vanity at the time, and also took them down 2-1 after losing the first map. Version 1 dominated Haven 13-3 and took a strong 8-4 first half on Ascent, and here's where Lakia would become famous, as he had an incredible 1v2 clutch in the 23rd round, breaking the tie and allowing his team to take the map in overtime 15-13 and evening out the map score. Split would go like its namesake, with both teams taking a 6-6 half, going to another overtime, where Newturn would take back-to-back rounds to win the map 14-12 and steal the series away from Version 1. They would then go on to face Sentinels in the upper final, but got absolutely destroyed, as Sick and Tens were in top form, only taking 9 rounds across 2 maps. They would face Fnatic in the lower final, and although the series went 3 maps, they were unable to get over the line, as each of them went 13-8, but Bind and Haven went the way of Fnatic. This unfortunately would be the last we would really see of Lakia on the big stage and in general for a while, as he was poached by Vision Strikers and joined the roster as their 6th man. He only played 3 full series and a total of 8 maps in the remainder of Korean Challengers, and although he attended both Masters Berlin and Champions 2021 with the team, my man only played 1 map in both events. The former, where his team got absolutely destroyed on Bind 13-2 by Gambit, and the latter was a 13-10 loss on Icebox to Fnatic. They literally stole him from their biggest competition to have him play 10 maps for the rest of the year. Lakia would then depart the roster and move to Japan to play with Exist in the Challenger scene. Fun fact, one of his teammates at the time was named Rip Pablo Escobar, and I think that is a goated name. Unfortunately, he is now retired, but he is still one of the best IGNs in gaming in my opinion. Exist would qualify for both Challengers main events throughout the year, but would not find too much success. Lakia would then leave the roster to join DamWon Gaming before East Asia LCQ. He would rejoin his former teammate Allow, but DamWon would not go far in the qualifier, as they lost to Crazy Raccoon 2-1 and K1 Esports 2-0. Lakia would remain with this team as they rebranded to D+ Esports. Honestly, one of the worst rebrands of all time in my opinion. Rest in peace my boys Showmaker and Canyon, as they looked so good in the old colors. And they would compete in KR Challengers for 2023. They were able to dominate the region, winning both splits and qualifying for Pacific Ascension. They would unfortunately not make it out of groups, as they took wins over Orangutan and Bleed, but suffered losses to Scars and Bonkers, ending their year. And that leads us to where we are today, with Lakia joining a premier KR organization and will be part of their rebuild. Lakia has put up decent numbers in Tier 2, but he is definitely still beloved by the community, and I'm happy to see him get another shot, especially for the amount of time that he has wasted. He has his ups and downs, but every player does, but there's just something about him. He has that it factor, and I think he'll do well in Tier 1. Hope for the best, and we'll just have to see who the final 2 members of this roster will shake out to be. In other news, Rex Regum Keon have signed Russian duelist player Jemkin to their 2024 roster. Jemkin most notably has made his name on Scars during their dominant 2023 and most recent Ascension run, where he was able to lead his team all the way to the grand finals along with fellow Russian Crystal. Scars were able to place 3rd in Split 1 and won Split 2 of Challengers in 2023, and And although they failed to bleed 3-0 in the grand finals of Ascension, and Jemkin infamously going 0-14 on Bind, the duelist main impressed the world nonetheless. He put up huge numbers throughout the year and is definitely a great addition to the league, and I think he has the potential to be a top duelist, and look to him to have explosive performances. RRQ has filled out another 6-man roster to compete in 2024, and their newest additions of Estrella and Jemkin has me pretty excited for this roster. Look out for them to be a dark horse roster next year. And last but not least, Team Secret have found their 5th for 2024, signing NDG to their roster. NDG is a controller initiator player that most recently played for NAUS, a Filipino organization that participated in Challengers Philippines. They absolutely dominated their region, only losing 4 maps total. They were able to win both regional championships and attended Ascension, where they were able to escape groups as the first seed, but would unfortunately lose to Scars in the semifinals. NDG would leave the roster during Split 2 and now has been called up to the big leagues. I really don't know too much about him other than the role that he has played in the past. He most likely will have another role swap coming into this roster, as both Borkum and Jesse Vash play his role, but he is a young talent, so that's always a plus. I think this team again will be pushed forward based off their young talent, so hopefully NDG can develop and be part of that trio. He just missed out on the goated NRG NDG title, but TS NDG ain't too shabby. And that's the video. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you think about all of these roster moves happening in Pacific. Do you think Ye and Bleed will be immediate contenders after putting together a super team? Do you think GE's and RRQ's new additions would be enough to push them over the line? I would love to hear what you guys have to say. If you like this video, consider checking out this video right here, where I talk about the history of some of the Chinese teams that we've gotten to see so far. Stay tuned for the America's Rostermania video coming out next. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay hydrated. Peace.